Hello everyone, welcome to today's live IELTS stream on our channel, Academic English Help. If you haven't subscribed so far, please do so, and then you can keep up with these classes in the schedule. My name is Adrian. I'm coming to you live from beautiful Budapest, Hungary. Hopefully you can hear me and see me okay. You can see my hair's going up a little bit. There we go, get that down. Looking good for the class. Hi Arcana, hi Jeffrey, hi Sanim. Again, if you can't hear me or you can't see the board behind me, please say something so I know to fix it. Otherwise, we'll get going here. Today is June 20th, 2018, and we are focusing on IELTS Task 1, a basic line graph today. We'll talk about that a little bit. The materials are coming from aehelp.com for academic IELTS and gieltshelp.com for general IELTS. So definitely visit us there. Try the course for free. If you like it, sign up for the full course. You will have lots and lots of videos, over 100 hours of video lessons, 6 full practice exams, interactive courses for your phone and tablet, as well as a full interactive course with strategies, tips to help you out. If you go to the Google Play Store, you can download our app for free. Academic IELTS Help, that's what you want to do a search for. Join our full course and pass the IELTS. Don't waste your money again and again. IELTS is an expensive test, so spend a little to save a lot. I know there's a lot of free materials out there, but the good materials generally cost a couple dollars, regardless if you choose us or someone else. All right, girls and guys, so let's dig into it. If you have any questions, by the way, feel free to contact me. My name is Adrian, and the email is adrian@aehelp.com. You can set up some live Skype speaking practice there as well. That's a paid service. I can tell you about that if you send me an email. Here's our schedule. Today, writing task 1. Tomorrow, we'll do a writing task 2. It was requested by one of our sponsors. If you're a sponsor on our channel, you can make special requests for lessons as well. You get access to our exams. We will be doing a speaking section on the 22nd, and then here are the remaining classes all the way to the 28th. Okay, and then let's get right to our question further down here. So here we go. Make that a little bit smaller so you can see the full question. There you go. There's the question that we'll be looking at today. All right. So again, this question is coming out of our website. On our website, there's a place where you can click on a task 1, and then you can find these questions, write the response, and send it to us. I'm doing very well, thank you everyone. All right, Jeffrey, you saw this question on the app. That's good if you logged in through the app into our website. So here, the question is, I kind of moved this over just a second. The question is, the line graph below shows the projected population growth of China and India. Select the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So it's a simple line graph that shows population growth. I'm trying to get the graph as big as I can for you so you can see all the information. Okay, so here it shows the projected population growth. All right, so you get to the writing section in your IELTS exam. You're probably a little bit mentally exhausted by this point because you've done about an hour of listening and 1 hour of reading, and now you have to do an hour of writing. And you have 20 minutes for task 1. Okay, don't spend more than 20 minutes. You need to make sure you have 40 minutes for task 2. It has the heavier weight. You have to write 150 words minimum. All right, and I know lots of people are doing their IELTS this weekend, so good luck to all the students doing their IELTS this weekend. I just saw that one of you said it's a bit bright, so let me make it a little bit darker for you. There you go. Okay, so what do? You're looking at task 1. What should you do? What should be your first step? Okay, what is your very, very first step? Okay, let me hear you or see you write. What is your first step when you get to task 1? You open it up, you're looking at the question. What should you do? So Sanim says you should probably paraphrase the question. Right, so yeah, let's do that. So again, this question here is saying the line graph below shows the projected population growth of China and India. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So try to paraphrase that for me. The line graph below shows the projected population growth of China and India. How can you paraphrase that? Mohammed, it must be something on your end. We tested the site and it works fine on our end. So here, your first step should be to paraphrase, and in this question it is especially important. The reason being is that there's something very interesting about this question that you need to recognize before you start writing, because it will affect your whole essay. All right? So let me see how you paraphrase this question. Let's put it up here. So the present polyline graph depicts, that's what Advit says. Well, let me help you out here. So this line graph depicts what? What does it depict? So show, depict, illustrate. There's a lot of different ways to paraphrase the word show. Projected population growth of China and India. All right, Jubilant says the line graph illustrates the increase in population between two countries, India and China. That's not bad. Manisha says the line graph depicts the expected development of population in two countries. Yeah. What can we say about China and India? Think about that as well. What does the word projected population mean? Also think about that. If you take a close look at the line graph, you can see that the years, let me make that a little bit bigger for you. You can see that the years here at the bottom are 2000 or 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020, 2030, 2040, 2050. Okay, so that's very interesting. Always pay attention to the X and Y axes on these line graphs. That's really, really important for your overview and your analysis. Okay, so Zahra says 2 Asian countries. Advid says 60-year period. So yeah, those are some good things to keep in mind. It is a 60-year period. That's absolutely a good thought to keep in mind for your overview. So let me help you out a little bit here with the paraphrasing. So this line graph depicts the expected or predicted change in population in two Asian countries which have the greatest number of citizens of all nations. Okay, so one of the interesting things to note here is we're comparing China and India, and China and India have by far the largest populations of any country in the world. So if you can recognize that and include it into your paraphrase, that's great, because now this can become the first sentence of your overview. So one important point to notice on this line graph is it's the predicted change. Here's a good question. What verb tense should I use in this line graph? So what are the tenses that I should use? There's a hint in my question there. 2 Asian countries is good. Estimated data, Channi is good. Yeah, there will definitely be future tense, Baljit and Manisha, absolutely. Ani, there's definitely should be some past tense and some present tense. So a lot of times students ask me, well, what tense should I use when I'm writing about a graph? Well, that depends. What kind of a graph are you looking at? So if you're looking at a graph like this one, where you see the past you see the present, and you see the future, then you will be using all three tenses when you're talking specifically about the population. When you talk about the graph itself, you use present tense because it is now. You're looking at the graph now. So keep that in mind, okay? I'll make a note of that for you as a piece of key information here. If you don't pay attention to this, by the way, so if you had a question like this on your IELTS and you didn't catch that it's past, present, and future, you will definitely be losing some marks, okay? And girls and guys, definitely take note of what some of your classmates are doing on the chat as well, because they're giving you some good advice. Like Navneet is giving you a lot of great synonyms for the word show: depict, reveal, represent, illustrate. So you want to learn those, okay? So here's an important tip, okay? When you are referring directly to the graph, you must use present tense verbs, okay? So for example, the line graph illustrates an increase in population between 2020 and 2030, okay? So notice how here in this example that I just put up here for you, I'm using present tense, okay? The line graph illustrates an increase in population between 2020 and 2030. This is present tense, even though the years are about the future. The reason why is because I'm talking about the line graph. And the line graph is now. It is information that exists now, so it's a general statement, okay? I hope that's clear. When you're discussing the information in the graph, then you need to use the correct tense that's shown by that information. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So when discussing information in the graph, you need to use correct information according to the date indicated by the graph. So here's an example with the same idea as the previous. So the population of both China and India will increase from 2020 to 2030 by 250,000 people. Okay, I'm not sure if that's the information in the graph, but this is just the example, okay? So notice here in this example, the population of both China and India will increase. It must be will, it must be the future participle will, because we're talking about 2020 and 2030. Here, I'm not relating to the graph, I'm relating to the actual information in the graph. So I need to make sure that my tense reflects the appropriate date, which is in the future. Okay, so note that difference. That's very important. I still see students making some mistakes with that, and unfortunately those do drop your mark because your writing becomes incoherent and inaccurate. So let me ask you, does that make sense? Okay, so do you understand the important tip that I'm trying to give you here when you're writing for task 1 and you're looking at a line graph or bar graph or pie charts that show you dates of past, present, and future, okay? So Kira, again, in the overview, it's most likely going to be present tense if you're talking about the graph, because you're more likely talking about the graph. However, if you're referring to the information, you need to use the appropriate tense. Okay, so I can see Baljit and Khaled, Jubilant, that you're understanding what I'm saying here. So that's great, okay? So now we can start, and we can basically just take our paraphrase here and use that as the first sentence of our overview. Okay, so here's our graph. We start with the overview. Your task 1 should have 3 paragraphs. It should have an overview, an analysis, and a brief summary. Okay, so here let's just put that into the overview. We've started the overview. I definitely recommend 1 or 2 more sentences. But before we do that, what's the next step? So what should I do next? When I'm looking at this graph, okay, what is my next step? So here the title says past, current, and projected population. Here it tells me that the blue line is China. Here it tells me that the red line is India. The y-axis shows me that it's population in billions, 0.8, 0.9, 1, 1.1, 1.2, and then here the x-axis shows me the years, so 1990, 2000, and all the way to 2050. So what should I look at next? What should I do next? I'm sitting in the IELTS. I've paraphrased the question. I understand it clearly. I know that I'm writing about a line graph. Bonus question here, guys. So here we obviously have to identify the key points, okay? So the key points is what we're going to identify before we start writing. Now, before I even do that, there is an interesting question that I want to ask you. What's the difference between a line graph versus a bar chart or a pie chart? So when you're writing about a line graph, what do you need to keep in mind? What does a line graph actually show? Okay, so before we label these main features that we're going to write about, what does a line graph actually show? That's right, Kira. So that's the first bit of it. Line graphs show change, right? So they show continuity. That's right. Wei Hao Xiong said they show continuity. That's really different than bar charts or pie charts. The reason I say that is, again, unfortunately, many students write about pie charts and bar charts the same as a line graph, and that's not good because bar charts and pie charts don't show continuity, okay? So this is kind of a warning for you to keep in mind when you sit the IELTS, okay? Okay, definitely keep this in mind. It's a very common mistake. It definitely decreases your score, so pay attention, okay? Line graphs show change or continuity over a period, usually time, whereby there is data depicted according to correlation between two variables, x, y axis, right? So know this word correlation, co meaning together, relation meaning relationship. Line graphs show correlations in data, okay? Our line graph here shows the correlation between population and time for the data of citizens of India and citizens of China. So the relationship between population here and time here is that there will be more than 1.3 billion people for China in 2020, and there will be exactly that amount for India, okay? So it's a correlation. Pie charts and bar graphs depict different kinds of information. I'm not going to detail those today, but make sure you learn those so you can write correctly for them. Too many times I see students writing for pie charts that the sales of something increases between these 2 years. It doesn't increase because you don't know what happens between the years, okay? I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, send me an email, ask me about it, okay? So make sure you keep this warning in mind, all right? This is what line graphs are used for. All right, now we can do what we talked about where we look at the main features. So when you're writing about a line graph, it makes sense to label your key features according to the time, so according to the y-axis. So pick one of the countries and then start discussing it, start discussing the trends, and then go all the way to the end. Between there, you can make comparisons to the other country. So here, I would likely start with India. You could start with China as well. And we can make a comparison between these points here. Then we can talk about this rapid increase. We can talk about this gradual increase. And then we can get to talking about the intersection here. So that would be number 3. And then we can talk about the points here at the end of the graph, which is 2050, which is this and this. Okay, so this is fairly simple for this kind of a line graph, all right? So start with this one, then move towards this one. Definitely report on that intersection. Anytime you see that intersection on a line graph, you should report it. All right, so before we do that, for the overview, we might want to talk about the X and Y axis a little bit and about this 60-year period. So that would be important for the overview, okay? All right, hopefully that makes sense. So let's go back to the overview section here and give a couple more sentences. So again, this is the start of our overview. This line graph depicts the predicted change in population in 2 Asian countries which have the greatest number of citizens of all nations, okay? And some teachers say don't talk about the X and Y axis. I disagree with that. I think in some cases like this one, it's a good idea to express what the X and Y axes are showing so that your reader is clear that you're interpreting the information. That is your goal here, okay? So let's do that, all right? As indicated by the y-axis, population is from 0.8 to how many? 1.6 billion. And as shown by the x-axis, there are 60 years of data depicted as intervals of decades. Okay. Again, another important vocabulary here is intervals. Know this word intervals, okay? Intervals is a useful piece of vocabulary when you're discussing a line graph. This is an interval here, this is an interval here, this is an interval here. This is an interval here, this is an interval here, and so on, all right? So know the word intervals, all right? So that's enough for your overview. Let me just get that into the next page so it's a little bit more clear as we progress. And then you can go to the analysis, which we just discussed, okay? So here, this line graph depicts the predicted change in population in 2 Asian countries which have the greatest number of citizens of all nations. As indicated by the x-axis, population is from 0.8 to 1.6 billion, and as shown by the x-axis, there are 60 years of data depicted as intervals of decades. Okay? Would be more clear to write it as decade intervals. Okay, so let's pop back to the graph. So this is our first point here. Okay, point number 1 is this here. Please give me a good sentence to describe this first interval in 1990. Okay, so 1990, make it a little bit bigger for you there. Give me the sentence that will describe this well. This first point. Let me just go back up here a little bit. All right, there we go. All right. I wouldn't start with at the beginning, Sanim, because at the beginning would be 5 billion years ago when the Earth was created. So at the beginning, I don't think it's a good way to start this one. I don't know if it would be good to say it is clear to see that, Hesped. It's not really useful language. First and foremost is unnecessary as well. During the year 1990, jubilant is closer, but it's still not accurate because we're using 10 decades. So this isn't the year 1990, this is the 1990s. So this is the decade of the 1990s. So there's a couple ways that you could do it. It's not in 1990, Murasa, it's in the 90s. The population of India was almost 800 million people, as where China was more by 300 million. Something like that would be better. Baljit, again, it's not in 1990 because it's the 90s, so I would keep it to the decades, okay? You could get a little bit more creative, girls and guys. So you're starting to get on the right track a bit. But you can definitely be a little bit more creative. How about this one? In the decade preceding the new millennium, if you can write like this, you're going to get a band 9 for sure. In the decade preceding the new millennium, India had a population of 800 million, as where China had 1.1 billion people. Okay, how about that? That's the way I would go about it. Okay, so the 1990s was the decade preceding the new millennium. India had a population of 800 million, as where China had 1.1 billion people. Okay. You could say that, Shergul. So Shergul, that's okay as well. It is evident from the bar graph that in the 90s, the population of China was much greater than India. Make sure you use a capital C and a capital I for China and for India. Lytton, that's a pretty good sentence as well. Again, I would say in the 90s, okay? It's hard to identify that we're talking about exactly 1990. Okay, good. So let's go back to the graph here. Now we want to talk about this change. So let's discuss this change in population. This was our point number 2. Can you give me some example sentences? Be brave, and then I can help correct what you're writing or give you feedback of whether or not I think it's correct. Taral Kumar, millennium means 1,000 years. Okay? Thanks for firming that up, Baljit. Climbed up is a bit of an awkward expression, Sanim. I wouldn't use it. It's totally okay to use the word increase. Upward trend is a very nice way to express it, Jubilant. So both India and China showed an upward trend, or show an upward trend. Okay? Now, again, girls and guys, be careful. Right now, we're in 2018, and according to the graph, you have 2020, 2030, so it's not just now, but it's also the future. You have to really pay attention to the tense that you're using. Manisha, that's a good start as well. The population of both nations follow an upward trend. Okay, the population of India and China increased throughout the period from 1990 until present, and will continue to do so, or is expected to continue doing so into the future. So you have to really, again, pay attention to what year you're in right now. You're right about here, right? This is roughly 2018. So if we look at the trends, they go much further past that, okay? So you have to be really careful with the words and the tense that you're using when you describe this, because we're going from the past into our current time, and then we continue into the future. So you have to keep that in mind, all right? Let's do this together then. So both, it's good to use these correlative conjunctions. I saw a couple of you using them, which is great. Both India and China experienced population growth over the past 20 years. Notably, India's increase is significantly more rapid than that of China's. By current time, which is roughly here, right? They're almost equal. So India is 1.3 billion and China is roughly 1.4 billion. Okay, so we can include that. At current, India's citizens number roughly 1.3 billion, and China's population is about 100 million more. Okay, so notice the comparisons that I'm using there. So here I was careful not to go past the current time period. Okay, so I stopped at 2018, which is roughly about here at 2020. Okay, now here we can see that, of course, there continues to be an increase, and we have to get to this mark here, which is in 2030s. Okay, so 2030s is where this important intersect happens here. Okay, so we need to write about that very, very clearly. Both countries both countries' population is expected or predicted to continue increasing into the future. By the 2030s, India's population is expected to do what? How should you report this? So how should you report this point in the graph? What are the words, or what's the vocabulary for this event that happens here? Okay. Crossover is okay. I think there are some better words than crossover, or some better expressions. Intersect is not the best here either. I'm using that to describe it here, but I wouldn't describe the data that way. Coincide is not so good. Equal is not so good. Level up is not so good. There's two words that are much better than the ones so far. Not plateau. There's no plateauing here. It's a plateau would be more or less a flat line. So colliding is not okay as well. There's no collision here. These countries aren't actually crashing with each other. So that's kind of strange as well. I still haven't seen the right word here. Not leg. Okay, let me help you out a little bit. There's basically two words that would work in the sentence. So by the 1930s, India's population is expected to, one word starts with EX. What's the word I'm thinking about? The other word, there's three more letters there. Or the other word starts with that. Or, sorry. So one of these two words. Yeah, that's right, Jeffrey. So exceed would be okay. So one word that you could use here is exceed. Okay. Or the other word that you could use here is surpass. That's right. And it's not past tense, guys. Be careful. It's got to be future, okay? Because it's expected to exceed or surpass. Okay, don't write both. I'm just doing this so you remember the vocabulary. Okay, remember the words exceed, remember the word surpass, okay? So by the 1930s, India's population is expected to exceed that of China's with over, oops, keep doing that because I think we're looking at our website, but here I've embedded this in here, with over 1.5 or 1.45 billion people. All right. So now, good. We've done a good job so far. We're paying attention to our tenses. We're reporting the main features, making comparisons where relevant. We've gotten to this point, and now we probably want to report on this next, and then on this one here. So how can I do that? So this is our next point here. This is roughly point number 4, and this is going to be point number 5. So can you please give me a sentence that describes point number 4? Okay. The point is clear, UK Sexy, by saying that in 2030s, India's population is expected to surpass that of China's. That is this point, okay? Because this is the point of surpassing or exceeding. So that makes absolutely clear sense to an educated reader if you write that. All right, so now point number 4 is what we're looking at. So give me one sentence there, and then we'll talk about the contrast, which is happening here at number 5. All right? Topping out would probably be China. That's an okay vocabulary there, Sped, but I wouldn't give too much emphasis there, okay? Jeffrey says the population of China starts to decline. Meanwhile, India's keeps soaring. That's a very good word. That's what I was thinking about, Jeffrey, that India's population is expected to soar until the 2050s, which we can express a different way. You should think about that, and then talk about China. So I would talk about India more and then go back to China, okay? All of you are focusing on China, but notice I've labeled that as number 5. Focus on India first, okay? So India's population is going to continue increasing while China's will decline. Khaled, that's a good start, and then you can get into the details, right? So sure, we can do that. Now make sure that you show strong contrast. Use words like however or conversely, okay? Show strong contrast. Use good conjunctions. So after this period, India's population will continue to soar for the next 20 years. However, China's population will plateau. I cannot spell that word. Check in a second. China's population will plateau and then decline. Okay. And then if you have more time, you can actually give the numbers. Okay. So you can say that by this time here, 2050, China's population will drop to 1.4 billion and India's will reach 1.6 billion. Before we say that, what's a good way to say 2050? Okay. What's a good another way to express 2050? I strongly encourage you girls and guys to really learn different ways to express the same idea. So again, we're talking about paraphrasing here. So half century, Nathan, that's very good. That's what I'm thinking about. What half century? Halfway through which century? Not half of the millennia, Maria. Half of the millennia is 500 years. Halfway through which century? That's right, Baljit. So that's what you have to write, okay? So that's what we want to put in here. So even though this looks like a really simple line graph, you can get quite fancy with how you report the data. Halfway through the 21st century, China is predicted to have approximately how many? Approximately just under 1.3 billion and India 1.6, right? So halfway through the 21st century, China is predicted to have just under 1.4 billion citizens, as where India will likely have closer to 1.6 billion people. Okay, good. So lots of information there. We're definitely going to reach that 150 word minimum. And now we can write a short summary. So a summary should be something that's clearly observable from the graph or chart. A lot of students think, really? A summary for task 1? Absolutely. I definitely think it's good to summarize your task 1, what your main observations are. There's definitely a one or two interesting points here. It's not an opinion. Okay, this is not an opinion. A summary is a clear piece of general and valuable information that can be observed from the graph. Okay, and this is true for a graph or a table or anything else. So this you can just start with in summary. Take something interesting out of here. So what is something that you can write? I wouldn't use in conclusion, Hesped. Save the in conclusion for task 2. This is just simply a summary. All right? So what can you say in general about the information shown by the data in this line graph? So overall is okay. Fozia or Nabin in general, it's okay. So Jeffrey says both countries had significant increases from past until present. However, it's predicted that this will change in the future. That's okay. Yeah. While in the past, China was more densely populated in comparison to India, future prediction shows a reverse trend of the two countries. Vandana, excellent. That's a great summary. I would write that as well. I wouldn't use in a nutshell here. Taral Kumar, in a nutshell, is kind of colloquial. It's an everyday expression. And this is an academic expository essay. So in a nutshell is a bit awkward. If you wrote that in university, your professor would probably draw a smiley face and then go -2%. In summary, China is observed as having greater population for the first 3 decades of the graph, but it is predicted that this trend will reverse in the future, in future years. Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely the key piece of information that we can take away from what we see here. Okay, let me do a quick word count check for you there. Let me see how many words we ended up with, minus, of course, a couple of the instruction words there. So that's roughly about 210 words, okay? So the word count we have is 210 words. Is that too much? No, it's not. It's 150 words minimum, so we've gone over by roughly 30%. If you're going for band 7.58, 8.59, you definitely need to write at least 150 words, and if you write well, you should be closer to 180, 190, 200 on something like this. So absolutely okay. If you miss this last sentence here, for example, China is predicted to have just under, that's fine. So you could take out this last sentence, you'd still get a very, very good score, all right? Now, let's review the essay, see how we did, see if it makes sense all in all, and then I'll give you a chance to ask me some questions. So this line graph depicts the predicted change in population in 2 Asian countries which have the greatest number of citizens of all nations. As indicated by the y-axis, population is from 0.8 to 1.6 billion, and as shown by the x-axis, there are 60 years of data depicted as decade intervals. In the 10 years preceding the new millennium, India had a population of 800 million, as where China had 1.1 billion people. Notice the past tense, had. Okay? Both India and China experienced, past tense, population growth over the past 20 years. Notably, India's increase is significantly more rapid than that of China's. At current, India's citizens number roughly 1.3 billion, and China's population is about 100 million more. Both countries' populations are predicted. If you have time to review your essay, if you're going for a band 9, you can make these kinds of changes. Populations are predicted to continue increasing into the future. By the 2030s, India's population is expected to exceed. Why is it is expected? Because here I'm referring to the graph. It's expected now, according to the graph, to exceed or surpass that of China's with over 1.45 billion people. After this period, India's population will continue to soar for the next 20 years. So here I'm paying attention to shift to the future participle, will. However, China's population will plateau and then decline. Halfway through the 21st century, China is predicted to have just under 1.4 billion citizens, as where India will likely have closer to 1.6 billion people. In summary, China is observed as having greater population for the first 3 decades of the graph, but it is predicted that this trend will reverse in future years. Boom, there it is. It's done. You're on your way to a nice high band score. All right. Yeah, you can talk about the y-axis and the x-axis, ISS. Now that we've gone over, I hope it makes sense. I hope that this is clear. Remember, line graphs show continuity, pie charts, bar graphs don't. Now you can ask me questions about task 1. Line graphs are the focus here, but if you have a different question, that's okay too. So go ahead and ask me anything that's confusing you or that you want to know about. If you don't get a chance or don't get an answer, you can send me an email as well. Okay, and I know a lot of you are having exams this weekend, so I really want to help you out here. Manisha, absolutely not. Okay. You're asking me, do I need to focus more on numbers? No. This is not a robot writing for a robot. So your goal here is to interpret the data in human terms. So it's actually better to include few numbers and focus more on human expressions like a quarter, halfway through the century, a significant increase. So you want to focus on those much, much more than the numbers. Okay. Hesped here, it's will plateau. So it's in the future, so it will plateau. Plateau can be used as a verb, okay? You can plateau. Lytton, you don't have to put a summary into task 1, but a solid one-sentence summary will make your essay more effective for sure. So you can easily gain another 0.5 marks or a half band if you have a nice, clear, crisp summary that captures the key piece of information observed in the graph. Yes, you can, Jubilant. So Jubilant, you can write the years between 1990 and 2050. You cannot write that if it's a pie chart or if it's a bar graph because you don't know what's between those pie charts. So you can for this line graph, you cannot for a pie chart or a bar graph. Jeffrey, no, definitely don't use first person in task 1. So if you get a flowchart of animals' life periods, you should still be using third person omniscient voice of the author, okay? You can use the word respectively, Baljit, where it's appropriate. Don't use words just to use them, Baljit, okay? And that's for everybody. So don't just use a word so that you can say, hey, I use this word, I'll get lots of points. No, that's not true. You need to focus on using words when they are needed, not just throwing them in there to try to get an extra point. Oftentimes when students do that, they actually lose points because their writing becomes very awkward, okay? So use words when needed, not just throwing them in there because your teacher said, hey, by the way, definitely an important point there. I know a lot of people will say, oh, increase your IELTS band score by using these 5 key words. Sorry, but I have to say that's kind of BS. I don't want to curse, so I'm not going to say what that actually means, but it's kind of BS. That's not true. That's not logical. That's not true communication. Just using words doesn't increase your IELTS band score. Using words correctly in context when they're needed, that's what increases your IELTS band score. Shergul, can you write first and last step in the conclusion process? Only if it's needed. If you're writing about a process essay, so a diagram that shows the first step and the last step, we looked at one of these a few days back, then you can use as the first step in the process or in the last step in the process. But I wouldn't use first step or last step in a line graph. It's really weird, okay? Manisha, I can't see your comments because they're just flying by, so can you please write it again, and then I'll pay attention to it. So just write it in there one more time for me. Yeah, exactly. You have to be very careful with those words, Jeffrey. In a pie chart or in a bar chart, saying increase or decrease is quite awkward. You should use more or less. So in a pie chart, you can say in 1990, there will be many more types of pizza in the store, okay? Increase and decrease is usually only appropriate for line graphs. Zahra, for self-study, if you're asking me what should you use, I definitely suggest for you to join our websites and use our books and our program there. I think it will help you a lot, okay? So that's my first advice. Cambridge does some pretty good work as well. I mean, they create the IELTS, obviously, but we have a lot of psychology that goes into our materials to help you really study well for the IELTS exam. So highly recommend. If you're general IELTS, go there. If you're academic IELTS, go there. Taral Kumar, can you make 2 paragraphs out of 1 big paragraph? Depends on the information. If you have 2 clearly different pieces of information or topics that you're talking about, then yes. In this case, I wouldn't, because you're basically comparing these 2 countries within 1 paragraph. So in this example, I would not write 1 paragraph about India and 1 paragraph about China. I think that would be a little bit awkward. It's better to have 1 paragraph where you're comparing both. But going back, Taral Kumar, to your question, if you get a type of question where you have 2 graphs together, let me see if I can bring up an example of that for you. Then, yeah, you could write 1 paragraph for the first graph and another paragraph for the second paragraph. So this is where this writing task 1 is coming from. I'm just logging into our page here, and I believe, yeah, so here you see an example where it's 2 graphs, right? So basically you have a line graph that's combined with a table, and here you could decide to write 1 paragraph on this information first, and then you could decide to write a second paragraph on the table after, okay? The description, Baljit, is the overview, yeah, description is the overview. So if you think description, overview, introduction, that's all the same, okay? So the description, the main features, is basically the overview. So you're describing what you're looking at and the 1, 2 main trends. That's your introduction. It's the same as an overview, same as a description. The best way to actually say it is introduction, all right? So luck is a little bit a part of the test, Jeffrey, but the IELTS exams are tested and retested for validity and reliability. So in test engineering, there are some very special tools and methods to make tests equally difficult at different times for the same people. I'm not going to get into that psychometrics right now, but you should find the IELTS roughly the same difficulty no matter when you take the exam. So it depends on your skill of how well you do. Is the overview necessary, Baljit? Yes, absolutely. The intro, the first paragraph, is absolutely necessary. If you have 1 big paragraph and you write it really well and it contains your introduction, analysis, and conclusion, you can still get a good mark, but if you separate it into 3, so overview, analysis, summary, it's a little bit more clear for your reader, so it's less likely that you lose marks. For table overview, look at the main data or the main information that's in there. And for tables, don't forget, just by adding together roughly the numbers that are in there, you can get some really good idea of the overview. So summing up the columns and summing up the rows can give you some good ideas for the overview and for the summary. Cast Curious, that's a really good question. You said, what are some serious mistakes that can make you lose marks in this essay, in your task 1? As I said before, the most common mistake why students are losing marks, 2, I'll give you 2. 1 is students write in a wrong way. So they'll write about a pie chart or a bar graph the same as a line graph. So they'll say things like, let's say that there are a few different pie charts. I'll give you an example here. Jump back to this one here. Let's go to vehicles, okay? So here you have 1980 and 1990 cars and trucks, and people will say, oh, the sales of cars will decrease between 1980 and 1990. That's a mistake. We don't know what happens in 1985, so we don't know if there are more or less cars being sold. It's not a line graph. So the number one mistake, Cast Curious, is that students write about bar charts and pie charts the same as line graphs, and that's wrong, okay? The second mistake that a lot of students make is they get a lot of the tenses wrong. So they're using past tense when they should be using present tense, okay? Yes, the panomic, the overview should be clearly separated from your body paragraph, okay? Arshdeep, you need to be very clear on leading expressions. You need to understand the different types of conjunctions in English, specifically coordinating, correlative, and subordinating. If that did not make sense to you, then after this class, I strongly recommend you go on our website or you do a search online for conjunctions in English, subordinating, correlative, coordinating. Do your research and make sure you know how to use those, okay? No, Malik. That's a very good question too. So Malik is asking, should we write about all the information in the graph? Absolutely not. This was a very simple line graph. On IELTS, you will probably get something a little bit more complicated, you cannot write about all of the information because you will run out of time and it will be a very awkward essay. The question always asks you to report the key features or the main features and make comparisons where relevant. The question does not ask you to write about all the information in the diagram or write about all the information in the graph. You can run out of time easily that way, so please don't do that. Please make sure that you focus on 5, 6 key pieces of information. Okay, Manisha, that's way off topic, so I'm not going to get into matching reading headings, but definitely send me an email on it. Check it out on the website. If something's not clear, I can help you out there. But remember what I said about that class. I think we've had a few classes on that. Okay, girls and guys, again, if I didn't have a chance to get to your question or answer your question, don't be shy. Send me an email. I'll try to help you out. I know a lot of you have exams this weekend. Again, my email is adrian@aehelp.com. Highly recommend downloading our app. If you're nervous about your speaking section, spend $25. Do a mock speaking interview so you can build your confidence, know what to expect. Again, if you're studying for academic IELTS, go to aehelp.com. If you're studying for general IELTS, go to gieltshelp.com. I appreciate your support, your viewership. Thank you again to our sponsors. You girls and guys are part of what makes this all happen by supporting us. And I wish all of you a beautiful rest of your day. Keep your confidence up. Keep your chin up no matter what. I wish you the best of luck on your exam. If I don't see you, hopefully I will see you for the next couple classes before that time. The app name is Academic IELTS Help. So that's the answer there. Somebody was just asking, Fazia. I'll see you all tomorrow, same time, 16:30 Central European Time. Bye for now. Have a wonderful evening. Much love to everyone.